Guys, today I'm going to give you a very basic explanation of what a bench chisel is and how to use it properly. Really, it's a pretty simple tool. You have one cutting edge, then you have, I guess, a blade if you want to call it that, or a shaft. You have a handle, and then you have a butt. This is a very cheap and somewhat heavy duty chisel. It's nothing fancy. I got a pack of 3 of these for $10, so it's not that great of quality, but it works. Now, probably the most important part of the chisel is the cutting edge. You have a bevel, and then you have a flat underside. Now, when it comes to storing chisels, I keep these 2 chisels that I use the most wedged in between the back of my workbench and this wall. It's not the safest thing to do, and if I were to pull this workbench out, everything would fall. But that hasn't happened to me yet, so until that happens, I'm not going to worry about it. I'll also keep some other chisels in a drawer, staggered like this, so that the blades are not touching each other. And this is just a microfiber cloth wrapped around a piece of wood so that they don't roll around everywhere. And you can use a chisel for really whatever you want. Generally, you'll use it for carving wood. You can use it to cut joints, to chamfer edges, but there's really no rules. You can use it to scrape glue off of your workbench. It's really up to you. I'll show you what chamfering an edge looks like with a chisel. Generally, I'll go with the bevel facing the wood. You can control it more. If you go the flat portion or the underside of the chisel facing the wood, you run into problems because your handle will hit that wood. So you can use the underside of the chisel to cut as long as your wood isn't longer than your chisel blade, basically. So if I wanted to flatten out this corner, again, we're going bevel down, and if you have a good sharp chisel, you'll feel it bite, and then an even stroke will shave off a piece of wood like that. When you hear it kind of sounding really gritty, your chisel is probably not very sharp. And yeah, this chisel is not the sharpest. We'll get into how to sharpen that later. But if you're trying to round over an edge, that's one way to use the chisel. Now, if you want to hog off a lot of material, you can use a hammer. Let's say I wanted to take off this entire corner. I'm going to go ahead and use or cut with the flat end facing the wood, because I can, and by that I mean I'm not going to run into issues where my handle is hitting the wood. I'm going to try to chop off this entire corner, and a lot of the times you'll use a mallet, but these are very heavy duty chisels, and I think I can get away with using a hammer. And we've taken off that corner, and it looks pretty all right. Now, really, the only safety concerns you're going to run into with using a chisel is if you're putting a lot of force on it, and if you have to put a lot of force on a tool, or you're working it too hard, it's probably not sharp, or it's not sharp enough. So let's get into how to sharpen these guys. I'm a huge supporter of these diamond stones. They are very expensive though. This was about $50. The pro to diamond stones is that quality ones are like actually completely flat within 1/1000th of an inch. and they last for a very long time. Now, so do wet stones and oil stones. They're a lot cheaper generally, but they're only flat for so long. And whenever it comes to chisels, if you want to get technical with it, you want the underside to be as flat as possible so that you have a nice, crisp, clean, and straight edge once you work on your bevel. If you don't have a flat stone and you try to do that on a wet stone or an oil stone, you're really just going to mess up that underside. And I'd say if you don't have a flat diamond stone or like a sheet of glass that's really flat with sandpaper, don't even worry about flattening this. I think you'll do more harm than good. I'll give you guys a quick rundown of how I sharpen chisels. Since I do have a flat surface to sharpen on, I will be running the underside of the chisel over the stone. So I'm going to take a Sharpie, any marker, and I'm going to mark up that edge. So that way I know whenever I'm sharpening, if there is Sharpie left that I can see, I missed that, so I need to continue sharpening. This marker's awful, so I'm going to get another one. There we go. And really the first like eighth of an inch is the most important. Alright, we'll take some water, slap it on the stone so that the pores don't clog up, and also to lubricate it some. Then I'll work the underside first, and I'm just going to press it flat on the stone and work it back and forth. And I'll do this for a few minutes or until that Sharpie is gone. I don't see any Sharpie left, so that means we are pretty flat, and I'm happy with that. So now we know that this plane of the blade is good and flat. Now we need to work on the bevel. And when I was looking at this chisel closer, the edge is not square, meaning it's slightly angled, and I'll have to work on that. That'll probably take me a good 20-30 minutes to work out. I'm not going to do that in this video. I'm just going to sharpen it for you guys. So when it comes to the bevel, that's the real tricky part. You'll lay it on the stone, and then you're going to raise the chisel until you kind of feel it lock on to that bevel. And once you feel that, you run it forward and backward, forward and backward. The most important part is to stay consistent, because if one stroke is at this angle, your next stroke is at the other, you're going to get a very rounded bevel. And I'm guilty of doing that. It's just because we're human and we're not perfect. They do sell chisel guides or chisel almost like carts that they ride on that keep the bevel at a consistent angle. I don't have one of those. I'll do it by hand. I think it's a good skill to have, but there's nothing wrong with using a chisel guide. Again, the most important thing is to get that Sharpie off, and as you can see, I already got a good amount off. I'll run this across the stone for a few more minutes, and we'll see what the blade looks like. I don't see any Sharpie. Yep, I think we're clean. Now once I've done that on both sides, I'll repeat the process, but there's a, if I did it right, there's a really small burr that you probably can't even see on the very edge of this blade. We need to work that off, so I'm going to run the flat part across my stone a few times, run the bevel across, repeat that process just a few more times. Now you can tell if or when your chisel is sharp by taking a fingernail And if you tap your fingernail with a chisel and push, it should catch on your nail, or it should at least scrape some nail off. And you can see that there is some of my nail on there. I'm not quite happy with how sharp this chisel is yet. So I will run it across this 1000 grit. Once that happens, I'll double check and see if it catches on my nail. Now you might be able to see at the very tip, we do have a burr. There we go, that's a good shot. We need to get that burr off of there. One way to do that is to take a piece of wood and, almost like you're sharpening it, scrape the blade across the wood a few times, and then I'll take the blade and I'll scrape it across the piece of wood, and you can actually see that burr came right off and it's sticking out of the wood now. So now that I have the burr off there, let's see how sharp we are. Oh yeah. The blade is not sliding around on that fingernail. It's sharp and it caught on that fingernail. So we know we're pretty sharp. And if we want to do a comparison, I think we're cutting a little bit better than what we were looking at earlier. It's not perfect, but chances are, if you have one of these lower quality chisels, you're not doing the most fine woodworking, and this will work for your purposes.